So now that we have tasks with notes, next we're going to add users to our application so that they could come here, create an account with a username and password, log in, and then have their own individual task list. So the first thing we need to do is create a new model for users, and since this is pretty much the same that we did with tasks in the previous video and notes, I'm just going to do this off camera and I'll show you the results. So I used the generator to generate me a user model. It has a name, email, and password digest. Now you can choose if you want these fields, but to be able to use Rails automatic authentication, you need to have a field called password digest. So it's important you spell it right. The other fields you can decide, maybe you can add a username or any other information if you want to collect, like their birth date or any other information that you want to collect when they sign up. You can add those fields in, and then of course I migrated the database. Now one thing we need to do is we need to activate or install the bcrypt gem. Now bcrypt is what's going to hash up our password so we can securely store this password in the database. It's going to salt our password, so if you don't know what those mean, make sure you pay attention in class, so go search on that. So we'll save the gem file, and we got to make sure that we call bundle install to install that new gem. Okay, so after that we need to make sure we quit our server and restart. So anytime you add a new gem, the server doesn't pick up that change, so you just need to quit it and restart. So now in our user model and app models user, the file that the generator created for us, I have added has secure password. Now this comes from the bcrypt gem that we just enabled, and what that will do is it will add password fields onto our model. Now it add password and password confirmation. Now it doesn't save those fields in the database, so they're kind of like virtual fields. We can fill them in, but when we go to save the model, they won't get saved in the database. But what it has done is add a before save hook that if those password fields are set, it'll make sure they match, and if they do, it'll generate our hash and store it in the password digest. Now, as you know, hopefully you can't undo that. You can't take the digest and reverse it back and get the password, and that's exactly what we want. So if somebody gets a hold of our database and they get that password digest field, they can't do anything with it. They just have to try to guess passwords to see if they get the right hash. So that's all from the has secure password. I'm also making sure that my email has an @ sign in it. There are more complicated regular expressions you can use for this, but a lot of times you've got to really pick the right one because you end up limiting some valid email addresses if you don't get a good regular expression. So I'll just keep it simple with an @ sign in the email address. And this also makes sure that they fill in the email address. And I'm also making sure it's unique, because two users with the same email address might be really confusing. You check the first one to see if they have the right password, and then you check the second one to see if they have the right password. So the user might not know which account they're going to use, so we'll just let them have one account per email address. And of course I make sure there's a name. Now next I'm going to do the form to create a new password, and also do the create action so that we'll process the form and save the user in the database. And again, this is a lot like the task model that we did before, so I'm going to do that off camera. So before I show you the result of creating that form, I just want to go into the console here to show you how that has secure password automatically works for us. So we'll create a new user, and we'll give the user a password. And we'll give the user a incorrect confirmation. So now these passwords don't match. So if we try to save this user it's not going to work. Now, the first thing that this SQL statement does is, this is for uniqueness. It's checking the database to see if there's already a user with this email. But let's go u.errors to see what other errors we have. And notice we have the confirmation doesn't match the password right here. And of course, we need an email with an @ sign and a name. But it automatically adds that onto our validation. So that's has secure password. So we don't have to worry about matching the passwords and making sure they're the same. So let's go ahead and fix that. u.password confirmation is now a correct password confirmation. And now we can try to save it again, and let's see our errors, and now the errors went away. And if you notice, the password digest is filtered, so by the logs. It's kind of a sensitive information. The logs, this is what would show up in a log file, so it's not going to put any passwords into the log file, which is good. But we can see u.password digest. Okay, and now we see that we have this is the digest. It includes both the salt and the hash that that we can use to verify password guesses. So basically, with a password guess, it pulls the salt out, combines it with the password guess, hashes it up, and checks to see if the hash matches. If it does, then the user got the right password. So let's go ahead and finish this. User.name equals Fred, and u.email equals fred@test.com. Okay, now we can save this user, and it worked. Okay, now let's go ahead and now if we go user.password, you see that we still have the password. But let's reload this user out of the database. So it's the first user that we got, and now let's go u.password, and you notice it's nil. So the password did not get saved in the database at all, but it was used to generate the password digest right before the user was saved into the database. So what can we do? Well, we can't get the password back, but we can say pass in a guess right here, and say authenticate, and again the has secure password adds that method on, so we can't pass in a guess, and it says nope, that password is wrong. And then we can go user.authenticate and get the correct password, and it returns not false, it returns the user, so that means the password was correct. So now we have a method to test if the user's password is correct or not, but we can't ever recreate the password. So if the user forgets his password, there's nothing we can do. We can't give it back to him, and that's exactly what we want, because we don't want hackers to hackers to be able to find the password from this password digest. So very similar to the task controller, we create a users controller with an index action. Now, I'm not going to do the index action. You can leave that later. If you want a page that lists out all of the users that have signed up, this is where you would do it. Now, you might want to lock that page down so that just admins can see it, or else you'll have users browsing around and getting maybe emails of other users. So I guess that's up to you whether you want your site to do that or not. So I added a new action right here, and a create action, which are very similar to the new one, the create from the task model. And if you notice, after I save the user, I just redirect them back to the home page with a notice saying the account has been created. Now, here is the form to sign up. I give them a name, email, and password and password confirmation. Now, if you notice here, this is the Bootstrap form gem adds, and if you read through the documentation, you can change the label so it'll say confirm password on the web page, but right here the field is really called password confirmation. So if I didn't have that, they would see password confirmation. By putting this, I'm able to rename what shows up on the web page. And finally, one other change that I made, by the way, that's the new view in the users folder. The index view, I haven't changed at all. I just went with what the generator created. And one other thing, I deleted that route that was created by the generator and added this resources users. So we're going to use the same RESTful routing that we use for tasks that we are going to use for users. So let's try to sign up a user, and I always liked it when I test it to see what makes sure my errors show up, and sure enough, well, we need a name. And George is signing up, and his password. And I'm going to try an incorrect password confirmation, and if you notice, it says that the password well, can't be blank. Let's try this again. So that's not the error I was expecting. I was expecting the password doesn't match. So let's go ahead and see what happens if we try to match our passwords. And it's still saying can't be blank. So I'm showing you this error on camera because it could be a very common error, and I want to show you, well, I fill in the password, why is it saying it's blank? And you can see down here my users params, I permit the name, email, and password confirmation. Well, what field did I forget? Yep, sure enough, I forgot the password field. So once again, this protects from users adding in fields and trying to edit fields that they shouldn't edit. For example, if this user had an admin field, they could try to add an admin box on their web page and submit that form, and then I might accidentally make them an admin. But this whitelists the fields, so it was whitelisting the password, so that wasn't showing up. So now let's try this again. And let's see here, and you see now we get that doesn't match, and if we get matching passwords, we get account created, so it works. Now one thing that we'll want to fix after they sign up, but we probably don't want to have them be logged out, but we don't have a login function yet, so we can't really log them either. So for now, we'll just redirect them here. When we get our login function working, then after they create their account, we'll log them in, and then they'll be logged in, so they won't have to create their account and then log in. They'll just create their account and be logged in. So it would be nice to have some links up here to be able to log in and sign up. So let's add those next. So I just added another UL class here, and I put the pull right class on that, which will move the links off to the right side. And refreshing, we get a page like this. Now one thing is our sign up link, if we go up here, it's users/new, which is totally fine, but if we want a little bit better link for sign up, kind of use a standard format, we can change the name of that link or the path. So back in my routes file, we'll still leave this resources here, but we could put what's called named routes, which is this right here. This is /about, so we could just say get sign up and have that go to the users controller and call the new action right there. So now there's two URLs or two paths that will go to the same new action, and that's totally okay. So then in my layout file, I can just use this sign up path right here, and if we refresh, we click the sign up link here, and now we have a short kind of standard URL to sign up. So the next thing we need to do is be able to create a way for users to log in. So we'll create a page with an email field and a password field that the user can fill in and log in. Hopefully you've been paying attention in class on the different methods that Rails has to be able to remember the login status, whether a user's logged in or not. So we'll go ahead and get started and create that page. So because we're using Rails secure cookies to remember the user, that actually becomes our model. So we don't have to create a model here, we just need the user interface. So let's start by creating a controller, and we'll call this controller the sessions controller. So when a user logs in, that kind of creates a session, and when they log out, that destroys their session. So we're going to create a sessions controller, and we need a new action so that the user can get a form to create a new session. Now next we need to work with the route so that we can route to our new sessions controller. Of course this gets us one route, but we're going to use RESTful routing for this as well. So resources sessions. Okay. And we're not going to use all the actions. There won't be an index action because it doesn't make sense to list out all of the people that are logged in. Maybe it does, but something for the admin to see, but we're not going to do that. And then there's no modifying a session. You either create one by logging in or delete one by logging out. So we really don't need all the actions for this, but we can still use RESTful routing. Of course, that our links won't look as nice if we do that, so we'll also add a login URL, so /login, and we'll map that to sessions new right there. And then instead of hard coding in a /login, in case we ever decide to change the name, we'll use the Rails helper to add the login path right there. So refresh the page and then we can click on login, and we can see that we're on the sessions new action just like we wanted to, and we're viewing the view that the generator created us when we created the sessions controller. So now we have a title with login and a form with an email password and a button to click to log in. Now this is a little bit different than our forms from before. Before we had model here because we had a model that backed the form, or the form was to create a model or to edit a model. In this case we don't have a model. We never created a model for sessions because our model is stored in our secure cookies, or will be stored in our secure cookies. But we still need a URL for this form to submit to, so we're using the RESTful routing. We're going to go to the create action, so of course a post method on the sessions path we'll call the create method. And refreshing, there's our form. So we'll go ahead and create the create method here, and what we want to do is check to see if the email and password are correct. So first let's try to find a user with that email. So we'll go user equals user dot where, and the email is equal to the email they sent in on their form. So the params has all the input, and we're checking their email. We're going to try to find a user, and we'll do first at the end. So well, instead of returning an array with one element in it, we'll only get one user. Now hopefully our validations are making sure that we don't get two users with the same email. So this will either return us one user or 0 users. So if there is a user and the user.authenticate, remember we called this method in the console to see how it works, we'll put in the password guess, or the password from the form that the user submitted. So if there is a user and we can authenticate with the user, then we'll log the user in. If not, we'll just redirect to the login path with an alert. And we'll just say invalid email or password. Now, the reason why we don't tell them if they got their email right or not is because that could help hackers if they say, oh, now I found an email. Now they can start guessing the password for that email. In this case, they don't know if the email even exists in our system or not. So in here, if the user gets his password correct, if there's a user and he got his password correct, we want to log him in. We'll handle that later. We'll just work on the rest of the functionality for now. And we'll redirect them to the login path again with a notice that they're logged in. Now, since we didn't log them in, they won't see anything to show that they're logged in and be a little bit confused. Well, it said I'm logged in, but of course they'll still won't be logged in. But we can at least test the functionality of this as it stands. So we'll go ahead and try to log in George. And he's the user we created, and we'll get his password right first time, and sure enough it says logged in. Of course, nothing changed. And now we'll try to log in George again and get his password wrong, and of course it says invalid email. And we'll even try to log in someone else that we haven't registered, and we'll see here invalid email or password. So that part is working. Now we got to be able to log in the user and remember that he is logged in. So back in our sessions controller, if they got their password right, what we'll do is we'll use this sessions and we'll just store the user ID of the user that logged in. So we'll get his ID and we'll store it in the session. And that should be enough to remember that this user is here. So we can just check the session. If there is a user ID set, then that user is logged in. If there's no user ID set, then there's no user logged in. Okay, and now let's log in a user. So we'll go log in George again. That way we'll actually log him in this time. And it says he's logged in, but there's nothing on our interface here that shows that he's logged in. So first of all, instead of redirecting them to the login path, they don't need to see the form again to log in. We'll redirect them to the root path. So they'll go to the home page. But now we need to modify the website to let the user know he's logged in. Let's get rid of the sign up and the login links and replace them with a logged out link when the user is logged in. So back in our application layout file where we have our navigation bar, I've added in this if statement. If the user ID in the session is not nil, have them display a logout link, else display a sign up and login link. So if they're logged in, they'll see log out, and if they're not logged in, they'll see sign up and log in. And then if you refresh the page, since George is already logged in, you'll see the sign up and login links have been replaced with a logout link. So it works. Next, we need to do the logout functionality. So back in our routes file, let's go ahead and have /logout route to the sessions destroy method. Now this isn't quite as RESTful because, as you know, the destroy method should get called on a delete request. But it's kind of a lot of work to create a form and submit it as a delete request. So we'll just use the standard GET request, but it will go to the right action in the controller. So now back in our layout file, since we have a named route, we might as well use it. And that's in case we ever decide to change it. We don't have to go into our code and change what the path really is. So now back in our sessions controller, we add a destroy method that just deletes this user ID out of the session, and this is how you delete it. You just set it equal to nil. After we've done that, we'll redirect them to the root path with a notice that they're logged out. So refresh to make sure we have the right link. We'll click log out, and sure enough it says logged out, and if you notice our sign up and login buttons reappear and the log out button, our link, has disappeared. Now this is working great. So what we need to do is back in our users controller, after we create a new account, we want to log them in. So right here we would want to save the session user ID for that user as well. But now our login code, what it means to be logged in and logged out, has been spread out throughout my application. For instance, logging someone in, we log them in using the user ID in the session here. We log them out here, and that's okay, they're in the same file. But now in this other file, we have a different, the same code doing the same thing. So what happens if one day we decide to change how we're storing the storing stuff in the session, and we go to, instead of user ID, we rename this, or we store it in a different way? Now we have to go through our entire application looking for every place we use this user ID, including in our layout files where we're checking to see if there's a user ID logged in or not. So it'd be really nice to centralize all of our logged in and log out logic into one file, and it would just create a few methods, one method to log someone in, another method to log someone out, and another method to check to see if someone's logged in or not. And we can centralize that in the application controller. If you notice, all of our controllers inherit from this application controller, and we have that file right here. There's nothing in it, but we can add methods into here, and since all of our controllers inherit those methods, we can call those methods from any one of our controller. So let's go ahead and add our login, logout, and a check to see if the user is logged in. We'll add those methods into here, and then we'll replace them in the controllers where we're using them. So I've created a login method. When we'll pass them a user, and we'll just set the user that's passed in, we'll set his ID into the session. Simple enough. The logout method erases the UID, the user ID, out of the session. And finally, we have a current user method, which I'm going to use. This will return the user if they're logged in, or it will return nil if they're not. So we can use this to check to see if someone's logged in, but it'll also give us a little extra functionality. We can get the current user that is logged in, and we can find out his name or his email, and everything else. So that will actually be really helpful. So we'll go ahead and use the user model. We'll try to find him by his ID that's stored in the session. Now this right here is called a canceling if statement in Ruby. So if there is a user ID set, then we'll do this. If not, it'll cancel this out and we'll return nil because this method wouldn't have done anything. Now the only other thing with this method is that we might call this method several times per request. And each time we call it, we'll load a user out of the database. So we'll hit our database quite a lot. So what we can do is cache the user that's logged in. And how can we cache them? We'll just set it to a instance variable called current user. So the current user equals this, and now we can do a little test. If there is a current user, return the current user, else load and save the current user in the database and return that. Now in Ruby, we always return the last line, so that this assignment will return the current user. So this is a little cache. If we already set the current user, just return them. If not, try to load them out of the database and return him that way, and save them in the cache. So the next time we ask for the current user, we'll pull them out of our cache variable. Now we can actually do all of this in one line of code right here. So this is equivalent. This is a little check right here. If the current user is set, return him. Or if he's not set, return this and set him. So this is a one line of code that does a lot of work for us. So now, back in our sessions controller, we'll just log the user in, call that method that we created on the create, and when we want to destroy the session or log out, we'll just call the logout method. And back in the user's controller, after they log in or after they create their account and we're able to save them in the database, we'll just log that user in. So that should all work. So now back in our application folder, instead of asking if the user ID is set, we can just check to see if there is a current user set. Now we want to make sure we call the method and not grab the instance variable that the method sets, because this could be the first time that we're calling the method, and of course the current user would be nil. We actually need to call the method. Now we're calling this method from a view, and the view can't call methods on the controller. So how are we going to call that method? Well, back in our application controller, right here, here's our method. So this can only be called by the application controller and whoever inherits from it, but it can't be called in the views. So Rails has a little method here where we can go ahead and add the current user method as a helper method. So that automatically makes this method visible inside of our views. So that's why we add that down there. So let's make sure those changes didn't break anything. So we'll log in George again. And we can see undefined local variable or method user, and I think we want to use @user there in our login method. So we'll put a little @ sign there because we had the @ sign user there. And now let's try this again. Just refresh and resend that form. And sure enough, he's logged in. Now let's go ahead and try logging him out. Now he's logged out. Let's go ahead and sign up a new user, Mary. And we'll give Mary an email address. We'll just make sure we have the password there. And mary@test.com. And we did the same thing in the user's controller. So we used @user there. So of course we want to use @user here. And now to check on this, if I resubmit the form, I actually already created a Mary. That's not going to work. So we'll create a foo bar account. And account created. Now the reason why Mary didn't work, the first time when I got the error, it actually had already created Mary. So when I resubmitted the form, Mary had already been created. And then the error happened, and then I refreshed, and I tried to recreate Mary, but she had already been created. So that's why I had to create another user. And if you notice, that user is automatically logged in, so they don't have to log in again. Now I've made two changes with my navigation bar. First of all, it doesn't make sense for users in my application to see tasks because the tasks are kind of private and only belong to users that are logged in. So it doesn't make sense for logged out users to see tasks. So once they're logged in, then the tasks link will appear. And another thing, I created a link right here for the user to see their own profile. So if you notice this, we'll just go to the user show action. So just adding in a method here, I say @user equals the current user. And now you're seeing how that cache is really helping us, because I called current user 2 times in the application view, and I'm now calling it 1 time in the controller. So every time I call it, I'm not going to recreate a SQL query. I'll use that. The first time I call it, I'll hit the database and pull the user out of the database. But every time after that, I'll use that same user right there. So we'll refresh, and foobar, the last user I created, is already logged in, and he can see his tasks. But now when I click on foobar, I just created a very simple view that has his name there. You can fill out more information on their profile on your own. And when we log out, notice the task disappears. So users will need to sign up or log in to be able to see their tasks. Now we finished our authentication part of this, and authentication is making sure someone is who they say they are. Now we're using a password to verify that the person who created the account is the same person that logs in later on. Next, we need to worry about authorization. And authorization is, does this person have permission to view something? So right now, I only want logged in users to be able to see our tasks. And right now, we don't have anybody logged in right here. But that doesn't stop them. There is no tasks link up here in the navigation bar, but they can always go up to the URL and type in /tasks and see the tasks even though they're not logged in. So I don't want that to happen, and of course every website will be different on who can see what, and that's all about authorization. So let's go ahead and add in some authorization to make sure that only logged in users can see our tasks. So we're in the task controller right now, and in the index action that lists out all tasks, we want to prevent unlogged in users or users that are not logged in from seeing the tasks. So how can we do that? Just replace this with an if statement, and unless in Ruby means if not. So if there is not a current user, unless there is a current user, redirect them to the root path saying invalid request. Now I'm just saying invalid request. I don't want to give them too much notice, like you don't have permission to see this, because that might kind of entice them to try to go see it, whereas invalid request just makes them think they did something wrong. And then if there is a current user, then we'll just display all the tasks right there. So saving that, let's go try that. And we'll refresh this page, and now sure enough they're not logged in and we get invalid request. So we'll go ahead and log George back in. And now that he's logged in, he'll go visit the task page and he can see it. Now logging George back out, we can go back and let's go ahead and maybe the URL to create a new task. No one's logged in, and now we have somebody here trying to create a new task. So we want to lock down this page too. And we want to lock down the task show action and the delete and the update and the edit. So we need to lock down all of the actions on this task model. So what that means is we need to add this check to all of our actions. Since we're adding it to all of our actions, maybe we should do it in a before filter right here. So maybe we can create a before action filter, and we want this one to run before we even load the task out of the database. So we'll put this up at the top. These actions run in the order they're listed, and we'll just call it Authenticate. Now I know we're working on authorization here, so why did I call this method Authenticate? Well, I want the user to be authenticated, because that's my authorization, is that the user should be authenticated, meaning he should just be logged in. So that's why I called the method Authenticate. Now we could put this method down here in the private area and it will work for this, but we have our other controllers as well, like the notes controller. And even some actions on the user's controller, we don't want them accessing the notes controller if they're not authenticated or not logged in. So if we want to have the same method applied to a whole bunch of different controllers, well, we better put it in the parent controller as well, which is great because that's where all the rest of my login, logout functionality is located as well. So we just created an authenticate method with that check right there. Now, because this isn't a before action filter, when I call redirect to, it won't continue on and do the rest of the action. It will just do the redirection. So we don't need to put an else do the rest of the action. That's just implied with the before filter. So going back to the task controller, now we don't need to do this in the index action anymore. And all of our actions should be locked down. So let's try visiting this page again. Yep, invalid request. Well, what happens if I try to see all the tasks? Invalid request. What happens if I try to see the task show page? Invalid request. So now we've locked down that controller. So let's quickly lock down the rest. So in my notes controller, before all of the actions, before we load anything out of the database, make sure the user is logged in. So that's good for the notes controller. The users controller, we're going to do the same thing for all the actions except the new and the create. Remember, the new action is how they get a form to create a new account, and the create is the processes the form and creates the new account. Well, if we lock down these, then only logged in users can create new accounts, and that kind of defeats the purpose of creating an account. So just checking that the sign up page is still there, and we can also check out the users page. Of course, we get redirected there, and we can try to check out a tasks notes page. Make sure that we're getting the redirect because there isn't a user logged in. Now right now, all users can see all tasks. What I want to do is I want to make it so that each user has their own individual task list and that it's private so other users can't see their tasks. And how we do that is we associate the task with the user, just like we associated notes with a task. Now, there are lots of variations of how you can do this. You could have a website where everything is shared, like the task model would be shared with everybody. Or you could have a website where the task model is visible to everybody, but each task still belongs to a user, usually the user that created it. So there's lots of different variations on this. But for me, I want the task to be private. So to make our task private, we need to associate the task with the user. Now this is a has many association, just like we did with tasks and notes. So one user has many tasks. To be able to do that, we need to add a foreign key onto the tasks table. So the table already exists, and we've already checked in our code to GitHub. So the only way we can modify the migrations is to create a new one. So we'll use our generator here. We'll generate a new migration. We're going to call it add user ID to tasks. And if we name this right, this will pick out that we're trying to modify the tasks table. So Rails is smart enough to know that we're trying to modify the Rails or the tasks table. We just need to tell it what columns we want to add. So we want to add a user ID column, and that's an integer. And after the migration runs, we can go ahead and test this out in the console after we migrate the database. And now just so you can see this migration here file that was generated, this is in the db migrate folder right here. We just see that we add a column to the tasks table. It's called user ID and it's an integer. Now just like we did with associating notes to tasks, the user will have many tasks or has many tasks. So we add that line in the user model. That's in our models user RB file. And then in our task RB file, we say it belongs to a user. Now running the bin_rel_c command, we can test some stuff out in the console. I'll just get the first user out of the database, and the first user is Fred right here. And we can see that the Fred, or this all users, now have a tasks method that will give us all the tasks that belong to him. But right now no tasks belong to Fred. But we also have lots of orphan tasks. All the tasks we created up to this point don't belong to any user. So we can actually use the console to fix that. We'll just say tasks to all, each. So each task, right here, we'll just say user.tasks. We'll just make them all belong to Fred right here. And what that does is it updated all of the tasks user ID things to be associated with Fred now. And so now if we say u.tasks, we see that we have his 3 tasks. So now we're looking at George right here, and we're looking at his tasks list. And if you notice, he still has he can still see the tasks. That's because we haven't changed the task controller at all, and it's still just going to display all tasks on this index action. So let's fix that next. So the first thing we'll do on the index action right here, instead of pulling out all of the tasks out of the database, we'll just say the current user. And remember, we're calling authenticate to make sure that someone is logged in. Whoever's logged in, let's display all of his tasks. And so now going back to the website, we can see that George doesn't have any tasks. Well, let's log out of George and log back in as Fred. And the tasks that we associated with Fred in the console are now belong to Fred. And we could see now Fred and George have private task lists. So now back in the create method, when users go to create new tasks, now remember this task is just for to display a form, but when users create new tasks, we need those tasks to be part of the, we need to associate them with the user that's creating them. So who is creating them? Well, the user that's logged in, and that's the current user. So right here, we can just say at task.user equals our current user. So now when we create new tasks, they'll belong to us. So we'll log out of Fred and log back into George and get him some tasks. Okay, and we'll go here. He doesn't have any tasks. Well, he should get some tasks. And I'll give him a priority right here. And now George has some tasks. And they're separate from Fred's tasks. Now we still have a little bit more work to do, because let's say that George is viewing his task right here, and he can go up here and try to change the number to see if he can get to another user's tasks. This is Fred's task right here, not George's. So why was he able to do that? Well, we're showing the task right here in this show method, and if we notice, well, when do we load the task out of the database? Well, that happens with the before action right here, and we don't check to see if the task belongs to the user that's logged in as we load them out. We just load out whatever task the user says he wants by the ID, so they can change the IDs in the URL and get whatever task they want. So to fix this, we'll just go current user.tasks.find, and that will limit it to just tasks that belong to the current user. And now, since that is in a before action filter, that automatically made the edit, update, and destroy have the same security so that they can only add, edit, and destroy their own tasks. So now, if George tries to mess with the numbers in the URL, we get this error, record not found. Remember, once we launch our app or deploy it to a live website, we'll be in production mode, and this will turn into a page not found error or a 404 error, and it'll just look like, oh, this page isn't there. And that's exactly what we want to have happen. Now, we better go to the notes controller where we're loading out our task as well. We are making sure someone's logged in, we're authenticating, but we better modify this to look it up through the user that's logged in, or else the security problems will be inside of the notes controller. So by changing the load task to look it up through the current user who's logged in, now they can only add, edit, and delete notes on their own tasks.